Ooh. Uh-oh. Ta-da! Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of creative coloring and mixing mediums. The concepts shared in this video are subjective and based heavily on personal preference. I hope that these ideas and applications help to inform you of some possibilities and inspire your own creative techniques in coloring. Today's coloring page features a group of heroes seated at a tavern table as drinks are being brought to them. In the background, you finally get proof of that fireplace I have been hinting at for the last couple of demonstrations. Going around the table, we have a dwarven fighter with his ridiculously large plate armor, elf cleric in her holy robes and ornamentation, human wizard with his flashy flowing robes, elf paladin in her extreme plate armor, and a dwarf ranger with her rugged leather gear. The first 75% of the coloring and texturing will be performed with the Blick Studio Art Markers, while the final 25% incorporates Prismacolor colored pencils and white acrylic paint. As I am coloring this back wall, you will have already noticed that I am not doing a grayscale coloring and texturing like I did in the last demonstration. I chose not to do that specifically for the sake of this video's content, so if you liked using the grayscale, go for it. I am continuing with the same or similar color choices I have been making throughout the coloring demonstrations, though I think I have made the wall a bit richer in color this time, since it is behind the fireplace. Notice the use of blue in the shadow cast by the fireplace. Adding color to our shadows is one of the ways to utilize both creative and realistic coloring. A cool color like blue can deepen the contrast in and near a shadow, while also making the shadow feel cooler than the warmer, better lit areas of our image. Moving on to the fireplace, I thicken the black lines of the stones with a dark gray, and then color in the dark side of the chimney and housing with a medium gray, making sure to get the little sections that show around the wizard's arm and body. Using the same blue I applied to the shadows on the wall, I lightly color in the dark gray stones of the fireplace before shading them a bit more with dark gray. I am working on establishing the cooler dark side of the fireplace while keeping it from disappearing into blackness. Moving on to the front of the fireplace, I start with a lighter gray and make a coloring pass on all of those stones. Using the blue, I shade in the stones, leaving the top and left edges of many stones untouched. I am also applying the blue in a splotchy pattern that is starting to simulate stone texture. We will be enhancing that later on. I am interpreting the fireplace as a rectangle form, with the pyramid shape of the chimney being recessed so that the single line of stones running across the top of the rectangle are casting a shadow upward onto the rest of the chimney. Using dark grays, I add more splotchy stone texture to the darker areas of the stones. Inside the fireplace, I am interpreting the lines as three distinct sections: the inner left wall, the back wall, and an arced opening that flows into the chimney. I fill the arced opening with poppy red and saturate it at the top with red before darkening the whole section in with dark gray. This blends the two reds a little bit while creating a very warm, dark area behind the fire. Using the colorless blender, I saturate the flames of the fire to push out any of the background color that might have seeped in. I then proceed to color the other two sections inside the fireplace with poppy red, add a little bit of saturation with red, and then gray it all down with a medium warm gray. Interestingly, the gray turns the color somewhat violet, which is a cooler color than intended, but should still work nicely as contrast against the bright hot flames of the fire. The floor gets colored in with a medium to dark gray, as it will be much darker than the tabletop and the characters. I also darken the edges of furniture that are facing away from the fire. Making another pass with the gray, I add the shape of a shadow under the ranger's chair and darken the left floor area near the fighter. I darken and blend the shadows to my liking. The chairs in the scene get toned in with yellow for the firelight on the edge closest to the fireplace. Using browns, they are colored in with wood grain textures and divided into planks. The table is colored in a similar way, and I decide to add a raised circular platform to the center of the table. The outer section of the table was then divided into planks and filled with wood grain texture strokes. At this point, I also decided that the raised central platform would have a deep spot in the center of it, turning the platform into a ring, and I opted to split the ring along previously drawn plank lines. The wood grain flows along the ring, opposite the plank textures, which makes this ring look like it is attached rather than carved as one piece with the rest of the table. Turning my attention to the fireplace, I color in the burning wood with dark browns and red, then color the flames with yellow and thinly outline with red. The dwarf fighter is the first character I color in the scene, and I decide to try using a blue undertone for the shadow as well as the yellow undertone for the firelight. I apply these colors to the tankard he is drinking from as well. There is a reason the dwarf fighter is the only one drinking at the moment. Did you catch it in the earlier coloring demonstrations? I apply all the colors previously chosen for the dwarf fighter over the top of the undertones, while making an effort to blend the lighter colors into the yellow firelight. I leave the tankard alone for now, but I'll be back for that in a little while. The cleric is up next, and I decide against using the blue and yellow undertone this time. Instead, I jump right into coloring with her hair and skin before getting started on the outfit. In the previous demonstration, I had colored the cleric's gloves the same color as her robe, but I meant to color them the same as her shoulder pads, so I rectified that in this image. Sitting in the background, the cleric is taking up a relatively small area, so the coloring goes fairly quickly, and I keep it a little more simple than I would if she were in the main area of the image. The small piece of seat cushion she is sitting on gets colored in with a dark gray. Continuing around the table to the wizard, I start by laying in his skin tone and then color his robes, starting with the darkest blue and working toward the lightest color, which gets used very sparingly. The red and gold of his clothes are next, and the whole process goes pretty quickly. I start coloring the elf paladin, just as I have started most of my character coloring, with the darkest colors first. This establishes large dark areas before adding some medium color and then finishing off with small light areas and leaving only the tiniest of highlights. Unfortunately, she rests along the curve of the book, and the camera catches a lot of glare from my lighting during this part of the coloring. Coloring the ranger begins with the hair, moving through her skin tones and into her outfit. I apply a dark blue rim light with the markers, which I haven't been doing on the other characters so far. Moving into the foreground, I start with the barmaid's fingers, which get a pale skin tone along with yellow firelight. I jump to the tankards, applying a dark blue shadow along the right side, leaving room for rim lighting, and then I add yellow firelight to the left side, leaving a white highlight edge beyond the yellow. The far right side of the tankards gets colored with a deep blue for rim lighting. I want the tankards to look like brass or bronze, so the darkest color is a dark brown, and I add some rough divots to the tankards to suggest they are well used and worn. The next color is a rich medium brown, and canary yellow is the lightest color of the tankards. This color set is similar to or the same as some of the gold sets I have created for some characters' accessories. When finished in this stage, the tankards look kind of like gold and are far too vibrant. We'll be back to adjust that soon. The beer gets laid in with 3 yellows, leaving small white highlights in places, and now the clash between the beer and the tankards is really apparent. Going back over the tankards with a light brown, the color is darkened and dulled a bit, which helps to differentiate between their structures and the beer. At this point, everything has been colored with the Blick Studio Art Markers, and I begin using Prismacolor colored pencils to adjust and refine the coloring. Incorporating the colored pencils into the marker coloring gives us the benefit of making smaller, subtler, and more transparent adjustments to color and texture than we can achieve with just the markers. If we were working on something very large with an even bigger set of colors, we might not need to mix mediums at all. Whether or not we mix mediums is another of those choices, along with which mediums we might mix together, that will be determined by your personal preference and experience. Any colored pencils could be used, but the quality of the pencils will determine how hard you have to work to get nice results, and Prismacolor are both the best and easiest pencils I have worked with so far. Starting in the back wall, I used the pencils to smooth the shadow transition from the dark gray blue to the warmer brown and yellow of the mud. Using a dark blue color, I also add a bit more of a cast shadow to some of the pits in the wall, dark brown to darken and enrich some of the wall coloring, and a yellow ochre to draw small highlights on the right edges of the pits. I go over the wall a couple more times with the browns, shifting colors a bit darker in places and smoothing colors along with using a yellow to richen up some of the lighter spots. The end result is very painterly, which I like, and it can be applied to everything in your coloring if you want to put the time and effort in. Using a dark, rich blue, I apply a light shading across the mud wall. The effect is very subtle, but it adds a bit more roughness and slightly cools the colors a bit more. Using black, I create a strong separation between the fireplace and the wall. With a violet color, I apply a heavy tint to the arced opening behind the fire and then lightly tone in the other 2 wall sections, using a bit more pressure at the corner. Switching to a dark brown pencil, I add brown to the stones of the fireplace, which makes them look a bit more dull and dirty. Glazing over the lighter sections of the stones with a lighter brown helps to dull down the brighter blues, adding more of a dirty stone feel. With a vibrant golden yellow, I add a small yellow glow to the edges of the stones at the opening of the fireplace, and then add a red transition from the yellow to the stone color. One more blending pass with the lighter brown color of the stones helps to ease the transition from red into stone as well. Going over the burning wood in the fireplace with red gives a dark red color like burning embers, and I break that up into sections with black, creating a mix of wood texture and small chunks of charcoal. Going over tiny spots with orange creates the detail of little glowy coals as well. I use a dark red pencil to intensify the red edges of the flames in the fireplace, and blend them in with orange and yellow, creating a more saturated fire color. Finishing off the flames, I add central white highlights with a white pencil. Looking over the image, I decided that the wood of the chairs was a bit too vibrant, so I lay a medium blue over them, shifting the color slightly toward gray-green. The ranger's chair gets a heavier treatment of this blue, as it is the furthest from the fire, and the side we see is turned completely away from it. I quickly and forcefully go over the darker side of the chairs in the background, and then switch to a brown color, adding more brown to the furniture. Using yellow and red, I add a bit of cast firelight onto the edges of the chairs that are closest to the fire. Black, blue-violet, and dark brown are then used to finalize the dark shadows of the chairs and add more textural details. Using the colored pencils, I darken the shadows, add color transitions, and color in the rim lighting on the back edges of the paladin. The wizard gets a similar treatment, but his sickly skin tone is one of the major areas covered here. Using violet, blue, and green, his skin is shaded and his eye sockets are darkened, making him look more elderly and frail. The contrast in the rest of his outfit is increased with colors and blending. Next up, the cleric gets a little bit of Prismacolor love, deepening her shadows, which helps to shape her forms and make her highlight areas pop out just a bit more. Moving on to the fighter, I add a bit more yellow to his highlight areas, and then color in his rim lighting with blue. A dark red pencil is used to redden up his armor, and that gets blended in with a rich brown color. Using black, I intensify the shadow line next to the rim lighting on the fighter and blend it into the red armor color. A few browns are used to add detail and shadow to the gold trim of his armor. Orange and yellow also help to enhance the vibrance of the gold trim. Some violet glazing in the dark portions of the fighter's face adds a bit more of a lifelike shadow. I make a handful more little tweaks with a couple of violet colors in the shadow areas under the table, and the fighter's tankard gets a little more working in with browns and yellow as well as a thin white highlight. Focusing on the tabletop, green is added to give a bit more color to the wood, while a dark, dull blue is used to enhance the plate lines and add more shadow. A dark red-brown further enhances the shadows and is also used to enrich some of the wood grain lines. A light yellow-brown is used to blend and smooth the colors of the tabletop. Black is used to push the plank lines a bit further, and dark brown is brought in to darken the wood across large sections of the table. Black comes in once again to add a bit more darkness to cast shadows from the characters and to create the darkest separation between the characters and their cast shadows. We have finally circled around the table to the ranger, and she gets a handful of slight color tweaks and refinements with the pencils, pushing the dark values and colors to make her pop with three-dimensionality. The tankards get a significant amount of colored pencil work, adding reds, browns, yellows, and white, with a strong vertical stroking pattern that helps to suggest the bronze or brash texture I have desired. Even the splashing beer gets a little bit of attention here, adding some golden brown shading to better accentuate the golden white shine of its highlights. Final white highlights are added to the coloring with white acrylic paint and a brush. The relative opaque quality of acrylic as compared to other mediums ensures that the highlights we paint on will be a stronger white than erasing with the colorless blender or coloring with the white pencil. Additionally, acrylic dries quickly, so nothing should be wet within about 5 minutes or so of applying the paint to the coloring page. It's important to use the white sparingly though, because we don't want to overdo the bright white highlights. I think the final colored image presents an interesting array of value, color, and texture that would be difficult to achieve solely with markers or colored pencils. This concludes the tutorials and demonstrations on alcohol markers, and hopefully it has answered any questions you might have had about them. If you do still have questions, share them in the comments section, and I will answer them the best I can. As I wrap this up, I want to thank you for watching the video and ask that you give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I also want to thank my Patreon patrons for supporting all of my creative pursuits. You are truly appreciated. You can acquire the PDF download of my fantasy coloring book or become a patron at patreon.com/EricPerkinsArtist, and patrons get the coloring book download as part of their membership. Next week's video is a review of the Blick Studio Art Markers, and I hope to see you there.